All right, family, welcome to the Helpful Trucker channel. Today, I'm honored to have the founder and lead consultant of EliteELDT, Mr. Chad Edwards here on the channel. And I'm going to be talking to Chad about some things in regards to getting your CDL and going through the process. I feel like Chad's an authority on the subject. So welcome to the channel, Chad. I really appreciate you coming to hang out with me and with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. It's a real honor. Let's start off just by tell the audience kind of who you are. All right.
Okay.
I'm always having people on the channel. Yeah. I know people got to be wondering, who the heck is this guy?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and how you got into EliteELDT and what it is as well.
Okay. Yeah, I have a lot of people that ask me when they meet me in public, like, how did you get into training truck drivers, basically? So to go back a few years, I got a CDL back in '98. I drove a truck for several years. Then I became a public school teacher, taught school for 6 years, but I went back and forth between driving and teaching a few times. And then later on in life, I got to drive charter buses and then some band buses for some groups out of Nashville. And then back in 2017, my local technical college wanted to add a CDL program. And so I actually got hired as the program director because I was the only applicant that had not only CDL driving experience, but also a college degree in education and teaching experience. And so I did that for 3 years. And then after COVID, of all things, they cut the CDL program to save money. And that's when I started EliteELDT, because I really felt like I had a good grasp on the CDL training industry. And it was at a time where the industry was transitioning into the new ELDT regulations. And I just wanted to continue that momentum, basically.
Makes sense. Makes sense. That's one of the first questions I want to ask you about is about ELDT,
Sure.
the federal regulation. But tell me a little bit more about EliteELDT. Like, tell the viewer what it is. I'd like you to tell the viewer what it is and kind of what you're helping people out with that.
So basically, our company has mostly sold online ELDT theory training courses for the last year or so. And we're really proud of the courses we offer. They're created using high quality computer animations, and therefore the students do not have to sit there and read the material to themselves or actually sit there and listen to it being read to them. So it's more enjoyable than a lot of the other courses out there. It's easy to digest because it almost puts you in that real life scenario. Even though it's a computer animation, you'll see an image of a truck going down the road while it's discussing topics to you. So being put in that situation makes learning easier, and therefore it makes retention easier. You're more likely to remember what you learned and be successful in your career. But another good thing is that we do not have a final exam at the end of our courses, because there's questions scattered throughout the course, and you have to answer the question correctly to progress on to the next section. So that way, by the time you finish the course, you've already passed with a 100%. A lot of people like that because there's people that are, have test anxiety, and so they don't have to take a test and they feel really good about that. But it also allows us to guarantee that if you finish the course, you're going to pass the course. And that's another thing people like to hear.
So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about ELDT, the actual regulation, just a little bit, because I made a few videos about this on my channel before February the 7th. I saw a lot of other truck drivers made videos on the subject as well. What was the purpose of ELDT? What was the main purpose of that overall?
The main purpose of actually, there was ELDT before February 7th of 2022, but it was a very small amount of required training. But now the new requirements for ELDT were created to enhance commercial vehicle safety on our nation's roadways by establishing a new standard for CDL training, essentially. That way, making some attempt to guarantee that everybody has at least a basic minimum amount of training, and standardized, of course, across the states, because it is a federal regulation.
Now, I guess the reason I asked that is because the school that I went to here in Virginia, in Chester, Virginia, as far as I'm concerned, like when all of the stuff that I read up as far as what the federal government was regulating or basically saying had to be covered in the ELDT training, the different segments of it. As far as I was concerned, when I read through it, I was really surprised because everything that I saw in it, I felt was things that the school that I went to was already covering. So what I was telling people on this subject when I was making videos on it on YouTube, I was saying, hey, listen, there's a lot of people here on YouTube telling you, you know, everything's about to change as far as getting your CDL after February the 7th. But after reading the stuff, I'm like, no, I mean, maybe it'll change at a few schools, but the school that I went to, I can't see them having to change anything because everything that the federal government was now mandating, the school that I went to, as far as I'm concerned, they were already doing. So that's the reason why I asked that question. Was there really schools that were not already meeting those standards before they put those regulations in place?
Well, you know, it's very interesting that you brought that point up because you're 100% correct. As a state technical college in not Gainesville, in Georgia, we had state curriculum and it broke down to being more thorough than actually the ELDT regulations. And we were covering all that already. So no, it didn't change a thing for schools like that. You probably have, what stands out to me most at this moment is you have a lot of truck driving schools that say, get your CDL in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or something, you know, just a short amount of time. And those schools tend to have a high failure rate because a lot of people they don't get enough practice and they can't be ready to pass a CDL test in that short of a time frame. And so these federal regulations, especially with regards to the road driving and range backing maneuvers, they state that the student must demonstrate proficiency in these skills. So if you have a school where they did not demonstrate proficiency, in other words, they're not able to do the backing maneuvers, then essentially that school did not meet the ELDT regulations. They, in theory, should probably lengthen their training or use smaller class sizes or something to where the students get more practice and therefore become proficient by the time they graduate. However, I don't think many of them really did that because that's what would cost them more money is having smaller classes, longer sessions, hiring more instructors, buying more trucks. You get the point. So.
I do. And before I go into this any deeper, you're on the TPR.
Yes, sir.
You're on the training provider registry. I just want to point that out to the viewer, I really want to position Chad here as the expert, as the professional in this area that he is. Okay. So go ahead.
We've actually, not only are we doing the online theory courses, but we are in the TPR as a traveling provider as well. So we do behind the wheel training. It's very customizable. It's very efficient and effective. Those are my two big buzzwords: efficient and effective.
You know,
whether it's our online classes or in person, that's what we strive for.
Makes sense. One more question I got pretty much about the ELDT.
Okay.
Do you feel that it has made the process of getting a CDL more cumbersome? That was a big thing in the community as well. Like, get your CDL before February 7th. It's going to get more cumbersome. It's going to get more difficult. I personally don't see how it would have made it more cumbersome, but I guess I can see why people would say that.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with that?
I think the industry made it out to sound like that was the case. A lot of companies were not too happy about it because they were claiming it's going to cost a lot of extra money to bring on drivers. But, you know, if you think about it, all of us need training before we get a CDL. There's nobody that can just wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to go take a CDL test without practice or without training. And so this now just requires training, where before, even though training was not required, you probably trained somehow before you took the test. So to answer your question, most people still have to be trained, whether your family member does it, you know, or you go through a truck driving school. You've got to get some training. And even if you choose to go through a family member or a friend, they can actually become a training provider themselves. So there's that common misunderstanding that you have to go to truck driving school. Well, that's not true. You don't have to go
Man,
to truck driving school.
you have to. I didn't plan on asking you to spotlight this, but you
Mm.
absolutely have to, because that is the popular consensus.
Right.
You have
Right.
to go to CDL school. So
Yep.
please continue, educate
Sure.
me and
Okay.
the community on
But
this.
you don't have to go to CDL school, but you do have to get theory training and behind the wheel training through a certified training provider. And like I was saying about that, and this is something a lot of people don't know. Their family, like if your father is a driver or your brother, somebody that has a truck, they can apply to become a training provider and train you and certify you once you are demonstrate proficiency in those skills like we talked about before. And then you would be eligible to take your CDL skills test without going through a technical school or trucking school and spending thousands and thousands of dollars. But not everybody's in that position. So even though it's helpful for some, it doesn't change anything for other people. You would still want to go through a more traditional school.
Who is it that would be best suited in that situation? You've got some people close to you that have access to trucks, have trucks, maybe in
Mhm.
trucking already. Who is the family member? What is their profile? The one that is would be best suited to go ahead and become a training provider so that they can train you, their nephew,
Mhm.
their son, whatever, so that you don't have to actually go
Right.
to a CDL school. Who are those drivers? Are they like me, one truck, one owner?
Sure.
I gotta rent
You
a
could.
lot to park my truck in. I don't really have anywhere to
Yeah.
even do any of this stuff at.
Right. Having the space to do the backing maneuvers is a big help, but not totally required. Um, excuse me. When you do apply to become a training provider, you have to list your location where the training is taking place. But if you park your truck at home, you could put down your home address because that's where you might be training for the pre-trip inspection. That's maybe where you're training on theory or, some other things. But you have to list an address. If you happen to know of a vacant parking lot or a big gravel lot somewhere that you could use for back-end maneuvers, I suggest you get permission first, but you just have to be creative sometimes. And now we're in a big gray area here. I want people to understand that, there's not anything written up about this in the regulations, but
Wow.
this is my interpretation of it. And my experience, because like I said, we're a traveling provider. We come on site and do training. And so when we report that those particular students have finished their behind the wheel training, it requests to put in an address where the training took place, and we put the address where we trained them, and usually that's on site with their employer. um, but no, like you were saying, what's the profile? It's going to be a driver that is willing to train somebody new. It's a driver that has the time to train somebody. It's the driver that, because you got to keep in mind all the legalities of it and liabilities. You don't want somebody driving a truck if they're not covered to drive that truck. But, another thing that goes along with that is most people that are willing to train somebody for behind the wheel, they don't want to fool with the theory training. And so that's where our online courses come in. They can send them over to do an online course that covers 30 topic areas, which is quite extensive. And that's why most companies and individuals don't want to take that on. Even if they're willing to do behind the wheel, they don't want to bother with the classroom work, basically. So the online courses are useful for that. It's perfectly compliant to do your training with 2 different providers, as long as you do your behind the wheel and your range maneuvers with the same provider. So, yeah, I think that's basically it. They've got to be willing to do it and have the time, have the space, be sure they're insured. And in fact, the instructor, the CDL driver that's going to apply has to have at least 2 years experience operating the same class of vehicle in which they're using for training.
Do they have to? Does the driver that's doing the training have to have a trainer's license?
Actually, they don't. Um, for ELDT, again, the federal regulations, they do not have to have anything. So there's no such thing as a trainer license. In fact,
Man, you are educating the heck out of me right now.
People are probably going to be falling asleep after all this,
I
but
don't think so.
okay. Well, this is the good stuff. You know, I talk to people about this on the phone almost daily when they call. So it's not a secret. It's just stuff that most people don't know.
Don't know.
But no, when you apply to become a training provider, you put in either your company name or your individual name and location, like we've said. However, if you were applying as a company or a business, it does not ask you to enter your trainer names. So the trainers are not identified necessarily when you apply to become a training provider. The only time I can think that their names show up would be on the certificates that the students get when they complete training. It does have to be signed off by a trainer, essentially. Another thing, I know there's one more thing about the trainers. They have to have the 2 years experience. Oh, and a training provider if they were to be a company. Well, there's some paperwork you have to keep. So you have to have like the qualifications of the trainers. So just some paperwork proving they have the experience and that they are properly licensed, and probably nothing more than you would have on that person as a driver. You know, since driver files are pretty extensive, that would cover a lot of same stuff. But again, even though I know a lot about this, these are things that there are things in the ELDT regulations about trainer requirements and what they have to have as far as experience to be a trainer. But they don't have to be named or identified. They just, have to have 2 years experience.
Have to have the credentials. Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand, man. That's some interesting stuff you just laid on us. It really is, because nobody is talking about that on YouTube.
And I think they don't want you to know that. They want you to think you've got to go to the school.
Wow.
Pay the money,
That's very interesting. Let's move on then. Let's move on to test day. We're talking about CDL testing. You've had a lot of experiences with testing people, I would assume, right? Is there a common theme that you see amongst people that pretty much get through the process of getting their CDL, and people that struggle with it, such as far as on test on when it comes to testing?
Well, when it comes to the testing, I'd say almost everybody's nervous, very nervous on test day, and that will cause them to mess up on the pre-trip. They'll forget some of the items, and they'll fail on the pre-trip. Even if they're ready to pass the back end and road drive, and they'll still fail the pre-trip, they won't even get on to do the other parts. So I don't know how to tell people not to be nervous. That's understandable, but just know your pre-trip inside and out. I believe most states utilize the same testing outline or format, let's say. And so you may even have to do a vehicle inspection or on the entire truck. In fact, I said vehicle inspection because I know here in Georgia, the state actually refers to it as the vehicle inspection, or VI, instead of the pre-trip inspection, but we still always call it pre-trip. Same thing. It's a lot more complex and extensive than what you would do on a daily basis as just your pre and post-trip inspection. And that's why it's so hard. It's just so in-depth. People take that for granted. Even some people that are experienced. I recently actually trained a guy. He had a CDL for 20 years, wasn't paying attention. It expired on him. And then when he went to the DMV to get it renewed, they told him he needed ELDT. He said, "What? I've been driving for 20 years. Didn't matter." So he had to do an online theory course, and I went and trained him in person. And when I'm talking to him about the pre-trip inspection, I almost felt like he kind of thought he knew what it involved already.
I know he was tough to deal with, man.
Yeah. And so, I don't, and that's just a common thing. I'm not even trying to say anything bad about him in particular, but I get that feeling that a lot of people take it for granted, or they think they already kind of know, or they'll say, "Well, I've watched some YouTube videos." Well, you know what? But there's a lot of people on YouTube that maybe they just got their CDL and now they're trying to tell everybody how to do it. That's not an expert in the field. You know, you want to be careful of what you hear on YouTube. In fact, when I trained at the State Technical College, we told the students, don't watch YouTube videos, especially they wanted to get help on backing and things like that. We said, don't watch them because they're going to tell you something different than we do. And even though it's trying to get to the same goal, you're, instead of just trying to learn it one way, you're trying to learn it 3 ways. And I had some students that almost messed up on test day because the night before they went and watched some YouTube videos, and it hurt them more than helped them.
That's interesting.
Maybe that got off topic. I don't know.
No, you absolutely didn't. I mean, I was asking you about, you know, some of the common themes among
Test
people
day.
that get through the process pretty simply and those that don't. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Continue. It looked like you wanted to continue.
Okay. You know, and I think one question we talked about earlier on was who's gonna be, like, what kind of thing would you do before a CDL school would be more successful, or what type of person's more successful coming into that? And that's usually just people that have some kind of a background with trucks or large vehicles. Maybe they've driven big RVs. Maybe they've just worked on a lot of vehicles, so they know what the parts are called and they know what the parts do. But or it's even somebody that maybe pulled a boat with their pickup truck, so they've at least backed up a trailer before, or somebody that shifted a manual transmission before. Any kind of experiences like that just kind of set a groundwork or foundation for learning to build on. People that have never done any of those things before, especially when it comes to mechanical things, they don't know what the parts are called. They don't know what they do. That takes a lot of time to learn. And so they might actually learn how to do a pre-trip inspection, but even if they pass and get their CDL, they still don't really know what those parts are doing. And you'd probably agree, I think it's good for all truck drivers to understand most of the mechanical parts of the truck and what they do. Because if you know what they do, then you'll know when they're not doing right. And if you know what they normally look like and they look different, you know something's wrong, you know, that kind of thing. I always tell my students, you need to know exactly what your truck sounds like, smells like, feels like. You know, if you're going down the road and you smell something different, you might need to get out and check that out, see what's wrong. But it's a good mechanical knowledge, you know.
Makes total sense. So. Makes total sense. And I didn't come into trucking, as far as from the way that I feel, with much mechanical knowledge. But my objective, you know, one of the reasons why I do anything is to learn. That absolutely is one of the reasons why I came into trucking. I was like, you know what, one benefit of this is I'm going to learn. I'm going to finally learn how a vehicle works and the different parts and all of that stuff, you know what I mean? And what they do, exactly what you just now said. So, you know, my main objective, and I passed my CDL test with flying colors first time around, no problem at all. But one of my main objectives when it came to learning that pre-trip was to get a better understanding of, like you said, actually what the parts are doing and actually, you know, what's going on. I tell people now, I'm like, listen, man, to pass the pre-trip, you need to stop trying to pass the pre-trip. You should have a goal to understand the truck. Like if your goal is to understand the truck, you'll probably have a higher success ratio passing the pre-trip. But if your only goal is to pass the pre-trip, you're only focused on memorizing things. And you know, like I tell my child when dealing with school, it's like, don't try to memorize it. Like, know the material, then you'll have a better command of the whole subject. So, and I definitely feel like when it comes to that pre-trip, most people are just trying to memorize it. They're literally trying to go in a routine, like ABCs. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna say that, and it might not work out like that on test day.
Yeah. And that's how we teach it. I hand them a stack of study guides, you know, but I say, really, I don't want you to rely on study guides, because in reality, this is more than just words on a page. I don't want you sitting there on CDL test day with your eyes closed trying to remember what was on that piece of paper. You know, I want you to look at that truck, look at that part, tell me what it is. And if you understand what it does, you can kind of tell me what could go wrong with it. Like, for example, we train people, basically everything, almost everything, you're going to say it's securely mounted. If it's metal, you're going to say it's not cracked, bent, or broken. If it's got fluid in it, you're going to say not leaking. And one thing that I throw in there is if you can see both ends, you can say it's securely mounted at both ends. So on a shock absorber, instead of trying to think, what did it say on that piece of paper? If you just look at it and you say, well, it's securely mounted at both ends, it's not cracked, bent, broken, and it's not leaking, then you've learned
You've
more
inspected
from,
that. You've inspected that
yeah,
shock
you're
absorber.
learning the truck. You're not memorizing off paper. You're looking at what you see and telling me what you could check it for.
Makes sense. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much the test day process has changed. It was 7 years ago before I went through, since I went through CDL testing, and I'm just wondering how much test day has changed. Can you give me a little overview about how that process
Yeah.
works now? Test day.
Well, I don't think it's changed at all. And I
Okay.
can only speak for Georgia, but I do know there's the three main parts: the vehicle inspection, the backing, and the road driving. You've got to pass one before you go on to the other. There's certain things like if you don't perform the air brake inspections properly, that's automatic failure. If you, I know in Georgia, they give you a 2-hour window. So if you if you're one of the unfortunate folks, like I call them, that gets what they call a full form, that means you've got to do a vehicle inspection on the entire truck and trailer, not just a section of it. And so it's going to take you a lot longer.
You say you call
And
that a full form?
a full form.
That's
And
how
so
I
I'm
took
not
mine.
sure.
That's
Okay,
how
I'm
I
not
took
sure if
mine.
every state does the same, but I think a lot of them do the same. So this is pretty good information no matter what state you're in. But there's like a Form A or Section A would be inspecting the front of the truck and under the hood. Form B is going to be like the cab to the back of the tractor. Form C is the entire trailer. So these are just randomly selected on test day. And then there's full form, like we said, which is the entire thing. Randomly selected, you might get A, B, or C, or full form. But no matter which one you get, you still have to do the in-cab inspection and air brake test, and you have to inspect the coupling devices. So that's
So
going
that
to be,
could now that process, those different sections. So it sounds like what you're saying is that could happen on different days. Like you could have to do a certain section
yeah,
one day and
yeah,
next
different
section.
days. And then even I've heard if you went one day and you failed Form A, if you go, when you go back again, they're not supposed to give you Form A again. They're supposed to give you different.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Supposed to,
I
but
guess
I've
that
known
I
in the
guess that
past.
prevents you from just memorizing what you might have messed up on the day before, and then just so you
Right.
still got to end up doing A, but it might not be the next time you come back. Is
Yep.
that what you're saying?
Yeah. You still got to know the whole truck. You got to know all sections, but you
Got you.
don't know which one you're going to be tested on.
Which one to go
And
test
same with
on?
the backing. So if you get past the pre-trip or the vehicle inspection, like I said, there's 6 backing maneuvers that are identified in the ELDT regulations. And those would be your straight line, your left and right offset, your driver and passenger parallel, and then an alley dock, or well, it actually says 90/45 alley dock. So in Georgia, we do the 90-degree alley dock. So those 6 maneuvers you have to demonstrate proficiency in as an ELDT student in order to complete that part of training. But on test day, if you get past your vehicle inspection, then you'll have to do 3 of the maneuvers, and it's always going to be the straight line and then either left or right offset, and then either one of the 2 parallels or the 90-degree alley dock. And so you won't have to do all 6. You'll have to do 3 on test day. And in Georgia, you get points for how many infractions you get or things you mess up. Like if you have to do extra pull-ups past your freebies, then you get 1 point for each one. If you encroach a line, you get 2 points for that. And so you can, I hate to say the word earn because it's not a good thing, but you can rack up 12 points and still pass the backing maneuvers here in Georgia on a CDL test. So I try to encourage my students, get past the straight line, get past the offset with no points. And then you've got all the points sitting there. If you kind of fumble the last and hardest one, don't get nervous. You got a lot of chances, a
Makes
lot of
total sense.
pull-ups. You can still do a lot of pull-ups and pass that thing.
Makes sense.
Then of
Yep.
course, if you pass backing, you go on the road.
Got you. Yeah, it sounds very similar to what I went through
Okay.
7 years ago. The
Yeah.
only thing that you described different is the going through the pre-trip inspection in sections. Cause I remember we had to do the whole thing. They allowed us to go do the both sides of the engine bay and the whole truck, and then down one side of the trailer and the back of the trailer. They didn't make us come back up the other side of the trailer because
Right.
it's
Now
the thing
you'll
is.
go down the driver's side, whether you're doing a truck, any kind of truck or bus, you generally are, it says in there, you go down the driver's side unless there's some unique item on the passenger side, which on a bus, you've got the entry doors and everything on the passenger side. So generally they will go down passenger side.
Makes sense. Got you. Got you. Okay, that's good. Yeah, it doesn't sound like the process has changed
Mhm.
too much, other than the sectionalized pre-trip
Mhm.
pre-trip inspection. So, I want to ask you about automatic restrictions. Right? Do you
Yeah.
have much contact with your students after you train
Mhm.
them, after they get their CDL? Do you have much contact with them after they go into the job
Mm,
market?
I don't really.
Okay.
Um, no.
Okay, okay, I got you. So, do you have a opinion, a
Mm.
perspective on automatic restriction? Having it, is it worth it?
Um,
Actually, learning how to do the manual. Tell me your thoughts on that.
yeah. Okay. I think when you're learning that if you can actually train in a manual, that will help you understand how you would use the gears properly in a big truck, even if it's an automatic big truck, because it helps you see how it helps you control the speed, especially on hills, Um, and I think that's another thing that creates a good foundation for learning. If you understand shifting of the gears and why you're choosing this gear or that gear, or how to downshift, and how the truck responds to the shifting, um, it gives you a better understanding, even if you just go off and drive an automatic truck later. So in training, I would love everybody to get a manual, because that means they're gonna know more, they're gonna be better, more prepared. But in reality, if you're going to go to work for a larger fleet, most they don't have any more manual trucks sitting around. So the only time you're going to encounter a manual truck is probably if you go to work for a smaller fleet or a small company, of course, something like that, local, or maybe if you want to buy your own truck, something inexpensive, then you might need to know how to drive a manual. But
Makes sense.
the bigger fleets, they're all new. You don't have to worry about it. So that's going to be your personal preference at that point.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. I appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah.
Now you are certified as a trainer
Mm.
and a third party tester and a tester as well,
Yeah,
correct?
I was actually trained as a third party tester here in Georgia. I'm not currently certified as one,
Okay.
because you have to perform a certain number of CDL tests each year, and I don't do any testing anymore.
Gotcha, gotcha. I understand that. But you got knowledge of both positions, both hats,
Yes. Yep.
correct?
And it really helped on the training side when you knew what the examiners look for.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Makes total sense. So from both of those perspectives, can you tell us like some of your or one maybe one of your or some of your top tips? We might have talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about being nervous when you're testing on test day.
Mhm.
But like what's some of your top tips for being able to, get through the process of
Mhm.
testing and getting your CDL successfully in a timely fashion,
Wow.
without having to repeat stuff. And,
Yeah.
and again, feel free to give your answer to that from both
Mhm.
perspectives, that of a
Okay.
trainer and a tester.
That's actually a hard question, even though it seems like it should be easy. Um, One thing that stands out, even though it's not, maybe it's a tip, be very aware of your timeline, um, because it might take a while before you can get into school, and then you have to consider how long is school going to take. And then there might be some time between when you finish school and when you actually get to take your CDL test. And then there might be some time, if you fail the test, what are you going to do next? A lot of people think it's going to be easy and quick, and it never really is. Um, and I won't get into the whole story, but I had a work acquaintance one time that went through one of the 3-week truck driving schools. And he was just trying to go from having class B to class A. it ended up taking him 5 months to actually get a Class A license.
Wow.
So he was out of work the whole time because he thought, I'm just going to quit my job and go to this school real quick and I'll be working in no time. And that's not, it didn't happen like that. And another thing to keep in mind with regards to the time frame, you're technically not supposed to be able to make your CDL skills test appointment until you've completed ELDT. So you can't set up all these appointments at the beginning. You have to complete this and then you can set up this, and then it might be a month out or more, but it all depends where you are, what school you go to, because some schools might just be third-party testers that could test you as soon as you're done. It might not apply to everybody, but depending on how you're planning to get your CDL, you need to keep in mind the time frame and what's required so that you can not lose perspective on that, especially if you're going to sit out of work and have bills to pay and so forth in the meantime. But I'd say coming into CDL training, if you have a few weeks before you start class, just start becoming familiar with the truck and the truck parts, like we said, the systems on the truck, what they do, how they work, what are common malfunctions. That's probably something I think would be a good way to spend your time. Another thing that I would tell anybody getting into any career, whether it's trucking or not, just be sure you know what the job requires and you know that that's something you really want to do, because you hear about people quite often that maybe they went to college or they trained for a couple of years or even a couple of months for a new job, and as soon as they get in that job, they hate it. It's not what they thought, and it's happened to me. We won't get into that, but anyway, it happens a lot. And trucking is a very unique job. It's a very unique lifestyle, and it is a lifestyle, not just a job. And if you have never been out there on the road, or you've never been away from your family, or just things like that, it's
an adjustment.
It's going to be an adjustment. So
it's an adjustment.
Just learn as much as you can about it. Maybe a little bit more than just watching YouTube. If you know a driver, try to ride with them or something. I actually did that when I was really young. I rode with a few of the local guys and at least got a little experience of what it's like being on the road before I went through my training.
All of that helps. All of that helps. Like I hadn't never thought about that but as you were talking, it makes total sense. You've never been really exposed to road life. You know, my dad was a truck driver all the years that I grew up, you know, so I know what it's like to be on the road for a week. You know, I've adapted to that already, you know, got family members around me. Everybody in my family drives a truck. I didn't have much mechanical knowledge of trucking, but as far as the schedule of truckers and what the career of a trucker is like, what his life is like on a day-to-day basis, you know, how tiring a person is at the end of the week, at the end of the month, the ups and downs, the dips. I kind of had a understanding of that already. And I, you know, like anything I get into, man, okay, I might have a deadline that I want to have it done by, but it's like, you know, how much can I get done before I get to the deadline? I don't want to wait till the deadline to start doing stuff. I want to get as far ahead of the game as I can. And that's just an attitude that I recommend anybody have when they're approaching anything. And it sounds like it's the same thing when you're in trucking. So, you know, if over the next few months you're looking at maybe possibly getting into trucking, again, it makes total sense to gather as much information about it as you can now. Like I said, try to ride with somebody, go hang out at a truck stop for a while, go visit a CDL school and talk to the people a little bit. Like, do whatever you can to get some insight into what you're about to get into. Makes total sense, man.
Yeah. And of course, you know, there's different types of trucking, even if you just think of over the road versus a local job. If you kind of know what suits you the best when you get into it, that would even help you pick what kind of training is best. Let's say, you know, you want to be home every night. And you're just going to be local delivery driver, you know, with a Class A truck or something. You might find a company nearby that's willing to train you in-house. And I know several here in Georgia that I recommend people go to. And even though it doesn't seem like a big deal, they had no idea that those companies right there in their backyard actually did CDL training.
Let me ask you that real quick as well. That's something that popped up in my mind. Companies that can train you. I mean, we know that we got the bigger companies,
Mhm.
But are there many companies out there that may not be showing up in a Google search or whatever, that can train a driver? Are there
Mhm.
many of those companies, or is it just a few? That's why I
There
can't find them.
is. I think there's getting to be more and more, and that's something that I've even tried suggesting or pushing with smaller companies because they all have for years talked about how hard it is to get
To
drivers.
get
Well,
drivers,
now
yep.
with new ELDT regulations, it's like it's still hard to get drivers. It's even harder to get drivers. Well, why don't you train them yourself? And that would be a good incentive for somebody to go to work for you because they can come straight to you, get their training, have a job lined up without that big timeline we talked about, without being on the road for several months at a time with trainers before they even start making their own paycheck or making a real paycheck. Um, so smaller companies, yes, more and more realize they need to train. And so how do you find those companies? Anybody that is a training provider is going to be listed. Well, they have to be listed in the training provider registry. So you can actually go to that website, which you can either do a Google search for FMCSA TPR and it'll pull it up, or the URL is the letters tpr.fmcsa.dot.gov. And from their homepage, you can do a provider search. And you can narrow the search a little bit, of course, by your state or your city, but also what kind of provider you're looking for, whether it's behind the wheel or online. You can also search by, like if you're looking to get a passenger endorsement or something, I think you can narrow it down like that. Another way to keep in mind is that some are listed as private and some are public. So public ones are going to be like CDL schools or technical colleges. Private is going to be like employers that just train their own employees. So if you narrow that search down, just be careful. You don't want to miss out on things that are useful for you. Try searching both public and private. Um,
Interesting.
but anybody that's listed as, well, I keep stumbling over my words for some reason. Anybody that's already certified as a training provider is listed in that training provider registry. However, there still might be some smaller companies that would consider doing CDL training that are not listed in there. So those ones you might just want to approach them. Perfect example, I went and trained a young man last week and he works for just a construction company. Well, they're not listed as a training provider. They're very small, but they've got that young man and another one that they're looking to provide CDL training for. So they had me come out and work with them in person, So, again, just ask people, go out and ask a lot of questions. You never know what you're going to find. You always find out more than you already knew, but you might find something great.
If an individual listens at this conversation, they're going to be better equipped to go out
Mhm.
and ask those questions. They
Yeah.
absolutely are going to be, man. I really appreciate you
Yeah.
being willing to share the stuff
I
that
mean,
you've
we're
done.
here to help, right?
100%, 100%. Where should I be sending viewers here on the channel that want to dig more into how you can help them? Where should I be sending them, and who should I be
Hmm.
sending to you, either to your website or to your courses, either one?
Yeah. We don't have a lot of resources on our website, but we do answer the phone 7 days a week. I spend a lot of time speaking to individuals and just giving out information. Um, so between our website and actually the TPR website, that one's helpful because it does have the search tool where they can find all the training providers listed in their area and they can narrow it down based on what they're looking for. Those That's probably the best resources I can think of offhand, really. I wish I
And
had more.
it's all good. And who
Yeah.
should I be telling about? What type of viewer should
Mhm.
I be telling? Because I get questions from viewers all the time,
Yeah.
Chad. I'll be honest with you. So, what type of viewer should I be referring to your courses?
Um,
Can you tell me that?
First off, anybody that wants to get a hazmat endorsement, they need to do an ELDT course, and that can be done 100% online. So we've got a great course for that. And that of course can be CDL trainees, or it can be existing CDL drivers. The other courses we sell are for people that want to get a CDL for the first time. And so those are going to be for people that are training, that maybe they already have somewhere to do behind the wheel training, but they need to just get in that theory training, and they're not going to go through a school. Most schools will do your theory training for you. So I get a lot of people that call, and what I tell them is, don't buy any online course until you know where you're going to do behind the wheel training first, because you might not have to buy an online course.
Makes sense.
But if you
I bet you they appreciate you telling them that.
Yeah, I don't want them to buy a course and then later on they find out they didn't have to spend that money. It's not worth it to me that they get upset about it. And I'm not trying to pull one over on anybody. So
yeah. I got you. So that gentleman that you mentioned earlier, or the company that you mentioned earlier, they got the guy, they got the other guy, and they're gonna be giving them behind the wheel training. That somebody like that would be the person that needed to access your online how to get a CDL training, basically, because they're getting their behind the wheel training from somebody else. But like you said, some of those companies that can provide that, they don't want to have to deal with the ELDT portion of it, right?
Right.
Makes sense. Yep. Makes sense. I definitely will keep that in mind as far as people that are that may ask questions in regards to the information you shared here. Yep. Will you be keeping eyes on the comments as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's good, because anybody that asks a question that only you could answer, it'd be good if you could see it as well. And I'll be sure to leave Chad Edwards' contact information, the links to everything he talked about here. I'll make sure we leave that in the description of this video. So Chad Edwards, I really appreciate you coming by and sharing.
Thank you for having me.
You're on the channel. Absolutely.
Good luck to everybody out there. And if you got a question, give me a shout.
Hey, and listen, if this goes well, if the viewers like the information that you're offering, which I would definitely think they would, I would love to have you back, man. I don't know if you're down for it or not, but I would absolutely love to have you back. Yeah.
Okay. Definitely. I'll try not to wear the same shirt next time.
Nah, that's good. I'll wear one similar to it. I wear a lot of those shirts with the lines and checks in them and stuff too. We'll look like twins next time we come on.
I know. You open my closet's nothing but plaid. I'm like,
there you go.
Make some changes here, man.
I appreciate you, Chad Edwards. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Maurice. All right. Have a great day.
Yep.